Today, I will be hitting two birds with one stone. I'm responding to two videos. Halo ruined first-person shooters by Under the Mayo and Identity Crisis, Why Halo Isn't Infinite by DJ Peach Cobbler, who I'll be referring to as DJ. Let it be known now that I do not condone harassment. I don't want my immense following to go on a witch hunt against these smaller channels. All jokes aside, the nerd army is powerful, and I appreciate you all. I'm rolling these two responses into one because they cover a lot of the same ground. They come from the same place and they make similar points. Unfortunately, they also repeat many of the same cliches and are similarly uninformed. So what points do these videos make? Halo ruined FPS opens with Under the Mayo discussing how Halo is a good game, but that its influence on the industry was bad. In this, I'm going to argue the opposite. Halo actually had an entirely positive effect on the industry and actually saved the FPS genre from the dark path that you're soon to hear described. He then presents a kind of history of first-person shooters, admittedly from his own experience. How he grew up playing games, Wolfenstein and especially Doom blew him away. Doom was culturally important and technologically innovative. The subsequent wave of PC first-person shooters such as Quake and Unreal Tournament was also very foundational. That was until Halo attacked. Due to its nature as a console game, it had to be brought down to a crawl with sluggish aiming and only two weapons that you have to reload. You need to take cover to heal, making it slow and lame that you need to wait for your shields to come back. Halo had introduced the cover-based tactical shooter. Now every studio wanted to copy Halo. This led to an industry-wide effect of slow, cover-based shooters. Halo and Call of Duty ruled hand in hand until Doom 2016 came along and saved the world by returning to classic shooter design, retaining the core foundations from the original Doom. Doom Eternal has only doubled down on the pure friggin' epicness. Now Halo has become irrelevant, being supplanted by other popular genres like Battle Royale. And that's where the story ends, where we are today. In Identity Crisis, the video opens with DJ Peach Cobbler discussing how he'd been too harsh on Halo in the past, how it's actually a game he enjoys. He acknowledges that Halo players want to return to classic gameplay, but you see, Halo gameplay isn't relevant in the modern day. Outside of the context of a console game in 2001, Halo's classic gameplay simply doesn't stand up. He presents this so elegantly with a Shakespeare quote, conveying how context matters. As the industry has grown up and the context has changed, Halo hasn't managed to keep up. What is it that has left Halo in the dust? The rhetorical waste bin of history. It's slow gameplay. And updating it for the modern audience would simply sacrifice all that makes Halo unique. So there's a conundrum. Halo is outdated and in need of updating. It needs to be fixed, but updating it would be counter to the design of the game. Thus, Halo's design is irrelevant. But do you know what shooter is evergreen? That's right, Doom. It witnessed a seamless transition from classic gameplay to saving FPS in the modern day. He gushes about Doom like a complete cuck soy boy. Doom, of course, isn't irrelevant because Doom 2016 and Eternal retain the feel of the classic games. Doom was just so friggin' epic, it proved that Doom's gameplay formula was relevant in the modern day, unlike Halo, which is just slow and half your time is spent hiding behind a rock. But seriously though, why does every single video on this game have to have this cringeworthy montage? It's always like, here's why this thing in another game is shit. Wait, what's that sound? One idea permeating both of these videos quite thoroughly is that Halo is slow. Halo introduced slow, tactical gameplay and cover-based shooting. This was because of the insidious effects of console gaming. Well, did Halo popularize cover-based shooting? Alexa, play Cotton Eye Joe. Oh yeah, and Alexa, what is the most popular FPS on PC? That's right, CSGO. How is it that you conveniently forget about the game that PC players have been playing for 20 years? The most popular FPS on PC. The game literally punishes you for moving. You get reticle bloom whenever you move. Your shots become less accurate while you're moving. You have to stop moving to shoot and stop shooting to move. And guess what? It's still almost the same game on the same exact maps. It's had a stubborn refusal to change, and it's super popular. That's not to say it hasn't had rebalances and changes, but its fundamental gameplay is untarnished over almost 20 years. Valve have resisted all the pressure from little kittywinkles to include sprint, ADS, and hit markers, because that would ruin the refined gameplay, with 20 years of refinement to be exact. Counter-Strike is definitely slower than Halo. It is definitely popular and has definitely had a huge effect on the industry. Slow shooters were already popular well before Halo. Is Halo too slow? Well, it's as fast as it needs to be. You see, when sprint was introduced and movement speed was increased, maps had to be expanded to accommodate. Basically, Halo is not too slow because the maps are built around your speed. How often were you literally too slow for the game, as in you had to move faster but couldn't? Pretty rarely, as Halo's maps are quite tightly designed. Speed is relative. When in Halo did you find your play was too slow for the enemies? Did you mean the combat was too slow? Because that implies you were always a step ahead of the enemies, that they were too easy to predict, that they were never too fast for you. Halo actually has very quick combat. The AI in each encounter was built around a 30-second timescale, the 30 seconds of fun. Basically, the AI had 30 seconds of unique behavior before looping with a new variable or strategy added. Halo combat is fundamentally built around very quick, short bursts with different variables changing in each battle. What I get from both of these videos is that slow refers to movement speed purely in terms of world units, in-game distance. Now, how much of that speed issue is related simply to appearance, to it just looking slow? It almost seems like increasing game speed is merely a placebo effect, when maps have to be increased in size. Your issue with speed is that Halo simply doesn't look fast. Much of the difference is simply aesthetic. DJ says,
"It was the reason for its success, and is now the reason for its irrelevance. Halo needs to be faster."
Why? Why does Halo need to be faster? Why is fast good? Also, as good as Titanfall 2 is, it's hardly representative of the gaming landscape today. Titanfall 2 was more of an anomaly, and its publisher actually found it to be quite disappointing. Hardly proof that gaming has moved on to some advanced mobility style and that Halo is irrelevant. Under the Mayo says,
"I was desperate to be able to spray my weapons more and let my skill show in my aim and my movement. But there was no movement. Everyone was too slow."
Halo, quote, didn't have movement. He also gives Fear as an example of a game which did have mobility. What does that even mean? It's so nebulous. Like, did Bungie just comment out the mobility line in their code? They set the movement boolean to false. He does give some examples of movement options which Halo lacked, such as rocket jumping. Like, really? You could have conducted a simple Google search to confirm whether that's true or not. And yes, Halo most certainly does have movement tricks, like rocket and grenade jumping. Strafing is incredibly important. Obscure map jumps, Gandhi hopping, the ninja. In Halo 2 you could super bounce. How many movement options did Doom have? Oh wait, you couldn't even jump. And yet that didn't preclude you from enjoying the game. This isn't about movement options or mobility. A common phrase both videos repeat is about how Halo was slowed down and made all these concessions for console. Examples of such concessions include 2-weapon limits or regenerating health. As DJ said,
"Changing the controls wasn't enough. Everything had to be changed in order to make shooters feel at home on a console."
First of all, both videos literally feature footage of GoldenEye 64. As it turns out, consoles already had shooters with classic features like non-regenerating health and weapon wheels. All of this was with a much worse and far more limiting controller. Secondly, this kind of downplays the design choices made in Halo, as if they weren't deliberate choices. Basically, I think both videos overstate how many of the design choices were made to fit the game on Xbox, as opposed to, deliberate choices. You can see the beginning of many of the design choices in Bungie's earlier games. Marathon had floaty controls way back then, carrying much of your momentum as you move. It was to place importance on positioning as well as giving delay to show clear cause and effect with different dynamic elements in the battlefield. Many of Bungie's games incorporated a minimalist approach to game design, stripping back the mechanics and asking what is and isn't necessary. Like Myth, for example, which is an RTS with no SimCity elements, no base building or unit training, just pure micro. Halo asked similar questions about FPS. Does a shooter need ammo management? Health management? Keycard collecting? Does it need a separate weapon for melee and grenades? Or can we speed it up by making those things accessible at all times? Each battle begins tabula rasa. Sure, the limitations of console had an effect on development, but many of the concessions for console, quote unquote, listed were deliberate. Like when DJ says,
"But Halo would almost always let you know exactly where they would be before you fought them. The enemies also almost always would stay in front of you, never surprising you from behind."
You even admit yourself that monster closets are bullshit design. Halo spawning enemies in dropships wasn't a concession for console. It was just good design, as are many other changes that you list. Speaking of other changes, Halo's regenerating health system turning the game into a cover shooter. Cover in shooters has an interesting history. It's been around since Wolfenstein 3D. Catacomb, if you really want to be pedantic. It's a factor in literally every shooter. You have to use cover in some capacity in virtually every FPS game ever. Of course, some games are tactical shooters. They force you to hide behind cover and pop in and out of it. Games such as Counter-Strike, for example. Do you know what mechanic turns games into cover shooters more than any other? That's right, hitscan. I'm surprised neither video even mentions this much at all, besides DJ referencing hard to avoid projectiles in Halo. There were games well before Halo that were completely based around hitscan, like Blood. Here's the thing, very few of the enemies in Halo use hitscan, and when they do, it sucks. There were plenty of games prior to Halo that saw you get lit up as soon as you leave cover. Halo isn't one of those games. Let me explain. There are two approaches to design. Balance, which is focused on longevity in PvP, and tuning, which is focused on fun in PvE. Regarding the tuning of Halo's sandbox, the most important weapon is the plasma rifle. Not because the player uses it the most, but because the player is getting shot by it the most. The plasma rifle is designed as a weapon to be shot by, more so than it is a weapon to shoot yourself. Hence why the projectile moves so slowly. The plasma rifle projectiles are designed to be dodgeable in Halo 1, and they are. It is the same with the needlers and the plasma pistols. You have a dedicated melee button to allow you to get up close to enemies, and the melee is actually useful. You get a one-hit kill on them from behind. You made an assumption about how the game is meant to be played. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. You went in convinced Halo was a cover-based tactical shooter. You played it as such, and then complained when the game played precisely the way you chose to play it. DJ even starts to complain about the flood rushing him. That's ultimately because it disturbed his established flow of hiding behind cover from enemies. When the gameplay changes up on him, he doesn't like it. Halo's gameplay was described by Jamie Griezmer, the designer, as being like ketchup, or even tomato sauce, if you will. It has every flavor, and each flavor is strong, sweet, savory, sour, salty. It's like a smorgasbord of gameplay. There's so many diverse styles of play, and cover is simply the one both of these people fall back on. Looking at the footage, they actually played quite timidly compared to how most fans would play Halo. Halo's design is the opposite of Doom Eternal in this sense. New Doom tells you exactly how to play. Its environments are padded playpens. As both of these reviewers said, it forces you into the fun zone. The game forces you into a state of flow by making you play very actively. You have to keep initiating QuickTime events to stay alive. You have to play on its terms. Halo isn't like that. The central tenet of Halo is player choice and expression. Each encounter is like a puzzle you have to figure out, and there's many ways to do so. Look at some of the best Halo players. Do they always hide behind cover? The game also has skulls. You can turn on Black Eye and Famine for an experience more like Doom Eternal. You have to melee enemies with Black Eye to regain health. You are basically playing a completely different game, going from normal to heroic to legendary. Plus, you have difficulty modifiers that make the gameplay differently, to stress the importance of tailoring to the player's experience. DJ says,
losing all your shields was a serious problem because you had to stop, while the enemies wouldn't.
To say, you have to stop and hide behind cover. This simply isn't true. The enemies are literally designed to pull back and stop firing whenever the player retreats or backs away. Let me quote Mr. Griezmer again. I think the reason Halo feels different is because how it is tuned. Most games have a single difficulty, or maybe they have multiple difficulty levels, but at any one time you are only playing on one difficulty. And the AI does a set amount of damage and each encounter has a certain challenge, and you are either good enough to beat it or not, and if not, maybe you learn or get lucky the next time and get through it. Halo is fundamentally different in that it lets the player set the pace. It waits to see what you will do, how hard you will push, and then it pushes back at just the right resistance. All you're doing is simply falling back when met with resistance to your aggression. The issue is that Halo allows you to be timid. It doesn't force your hand. Go back again and try Halo with some skulls, like the aforementioned Black Eye and Famine. See how differently the game plays. So Halo didn't invent cover-based shooting, nor did it popularize it. In Halo 1, enemy projectiles moved at the same speed regardless of difficulty. You could dodge them, it would just hurt more on Legendary. I will admit that Halo 2 is not like that. Projectile speed scales with difficulty. Halo 2's Legendary is notoriously bullshit. Why did they do this? Market pressure, of course. People who played Halo on higher difficulties gave the game higher review scores, and the market was full of tactical cover-based games like Ghost Recon, SWAT, Battlefield 1942, Medal of Honor, and wait a second. How could Halo be influenced by the trend of cover-based games if it was the originator of that trend? That is the fallacy of lumping in Halo and Call of Duty that Under the Mayo seems to do in his video. They weren't part of the same trend. They were not friends at all. They were mortal enemies in terms of design. This fact also contradicts DJ's point about how all the Halo games play the same. No, they don't. They really don't. I find it hard to listen to someone speak on a matter with such authority when they clearly show they haven't really engaged with the topic. The Halo games had very different sandboxes. Halo 1 was the kind of default sand. Halo 2 was like sand from St. Kilda Beach. Sure, it's pretty and improved in some ways, but there were Jekyll sniper-shaped syringes hidden just below the surface. Halo 3 actually resisted market trends by moving away from the cover shooter gameplay style, with popular games such as Call of Duty 3, Fear, Gears of War, Rainbow Six, Black, Battlefield 2. They actually decided to ignore those trends by focusing on Halo's free-flowing combat and doubling down on what made the series great. Halo really popularized sandbox shooters. The closest things being games like Battlefield and Star Wars Battlefront with their combined arms type gameplay. So many of the supposed Halo clones simply miss this entirely because nobody understands Halo. Not even the people making it. They needed years, millions of dollars and hundreds of staff, and they still failed to understand Halo. Twice. Unfortunately, it seems that this is due to many in the industry making a lot of the same assumptions, repeating the same cliches that heard in these videos. Halo is a dumb dude bro game. It's a slow cover-based shooter. They just wrote it off, and when they tried to copy it, they failed. Because Halo is the culmination of years of Bungie's accrued design knowledge, almost like a separate path of evolution, starting before even Marathon, parallel to the rest of the industry. Every decision you make in Halo is made in the moment. There is no health or ammo management. If someone backs off and gets their shield back, that means you lost that fight. You have to weigh up risk versus reward every second. It doesn't surprise me at all that both of these YouTubers love Doom Eternal. After all, it's a well-designed game. It gave you very limited ammo in your weapons. As such, you were forced to interact with the environment, scrounge ammo off the battlefield in the midst of the fight. You're incentivized to get up close to enemies due to the dedicated melee button, shooting them until their health is low enough, and then going in for the finishing blow. I like that some of the weapons have sandbox elements. Some do more shield damage, others shred health or armor, while some do precision damage to their weak spots. Each weapon has a specific role in the sandbox, and some were easier to use than others. You had a dedicated grenade button so you could throw grenades quickly at any point. You also have all these different scoring modes that get you to play the game in different ways you wouldn't have thought of, and yeah, I'm talking about Halo. Yes, I know it's sacrilege, but Doom 2016 and especially Eternal are not classic shooters. They actually take a fair bit from Halo. Yes, they have the superficial elements of classic shooters like carrying multiple weapons, but fundamentally they play completely differently to classic Doom. Glory kills are a central mechanic and are completely counter to anything you would have seen in gaming before 2006. DJ claims
Doom 4 got rid of the old that had aged poorly, kept the old that made it special, and threw in new mechanics that actually improved the old ones.
What did they keep? It's more like they made a completely new game and painted it with a Doom coat of paint. Not to say it's bad. Doom Eternal is a very good game, as is classic Doom, but they're really divorced from each other, more so than I think you'd like to admit. Indie throwback shooters are divorced as well, from broader market trends, that is. Both videos recognize the downfall of Halo. Neither accurately pinpoints why or even gets the timeline correct. DJ tries to make the case that shooters evolved. What are his examples? Titanfall 2? Fun game, but like I said, it hardly represents broader gaming trends, considering its Demon Spawn removed all of the unique elements from the game. These indie throwback shooters hardly represent a trend either. There's hardly a resurgence of classic 90s style shooters outside of 2 popular games and a bunch of niche indies. Also, I'm not saying indie games are bad here either. It's just that this conversation is about relevance. Also, BioShock Infinite is a dreadful example to say that the industry has moved forward. Is Halo relevant to the modern shooter market? Well, each game still sells millions of copies on a single platform. Halo is guaranteed to sell, still to this year. No doubt there are still millions of fans waiting breathlessly to see whether 343 will execute on all the feedback they got with Halo Infinite. And that's where these videos misjudge the downfall of Halo. Halo isn't dying because its gameplay style is no longer relevant, because it's been supplanted. The slow combat isn't the reason the series has been waning over the years, as DJ says. You're mixing up the cause and effect here. Halo abandoned its gameplay style, thus causing its slow death. The peak of sales and popularity just so happened to coincide with the most refined version of Halo's classic vision. As they started to make unnecessary changes that ruined the balance, that's when their sales dropped. By the time of Halo Reach, Bungie weren't worried about how to keep the Halo series relevant at all. They weren't remotely concerned with longevity, as they were already set to move on from Halo since Halo 3. Halo Reach was just keeping up their end of their contract with Microsoft. Halo Reach was still guaranteed sales and sold over 10 million on a single platform. So they saw it as a testbed more than anything. You see, Bungie still had tons of ideas they wanted to try out, including some they never got to. Seriously, Halo boat combat. We still haven't got it yet. As well as some ideas for their next game that they could test out in Halo. This is where things like sprint and loadouts and countless other features come from. The sandbox in Reach was quite short-sightedly balanced, seemingly centered around this one idea for an Elites vs Spartans mode, which is, to no one's shock, the place where Halo Reach plays the best. Now, they were competing with Modern Warfare 2 at the time, and it's doubtless that caused some considerations in development, but it's not like Halo was struggling for relevance at the time. Halo Reach didn't introduce all these features from other games because they were struggling for relevance. Halo 4 did ape features from other games. They did much more than simply change Master Chief's suit. Anybody who has actually played the game would know this. It's available on PC, by the way. They did do it to maintain relevance for the series, and that's because we hired people who hated Halo. 343 was almost an entirely new team with barely any ex-Bungie members. As such, it's likely the people who hated Halo who saw it as a dumb dude bro shooter and thought they could simply just copy features from the most popular game at the time. One can assume they made many of the same assumptions that DJ and Under the Mayo made in their videos. Halo 4 was the biggest mistake and easily the largest contributing factor to Halo's loss in popularity. I also want to quickly cover some points I couldn't cover otherwise. First, from Under the Mayo, the line about "we had a nice variety of shooters before Halo." There was still plenty of variety in shooters directly after Halo, including niche classic style retro shooters. It's just that nobody played them. There's also this pervasive idea that Halo's runaway success led to every single game adopting its gameplay features. I think you attribute too much of this to Halo. Like I said, Halo and Call of Duty were not part of one trend. They're more different from each other than Halo is from Quake. Many of these features, such as cover shooting, already existed and were popular before Halo. You lend such a ridiculous influence to Halo for literally every negative trend. Like, it's a very tenuous relationship between Halo and the trend of generic third-person cover shooters, especially the dumb AI part. Halo's enemy AI is among the very best. Is Halo responsible for big rigs over-the-road racing? For Ride to Hell Retribution? There's also that line that Halo players have had a negative reaction to Battle Royale. While yes, people are typically resistant to it, that's mostly due to its effects in other games. Where the main game gets neglected, Halo actually isn't that incompatible with Battle Royale. We've had a Halo Reach Hunger Games mode for years. Halo wasn't dominant in the early 2010s, and Halo isn't just now starting to see the negative effects of industry trends. As I demonstrated, they saw the negative effects of industry trends as early as Halo 2, and really saw it with Halo 4. Also, that part about how you find the enemies a bit visually bland? Like, what? Legitimately, if you find Halo enemies visually bland, what do you consider visually interesting? Oh well, I guess that's just an opinion. Too bad it's the wrong one. Also, a few more points on DJ's video.
Adding in sprint or faster shield recharges or faster enemies won't fix Halo.
They considered adding sprinting, a cover mechanic, and leaning to Halo 2, but decided against all of them for design reasons. Also, that bit about grenades being integral to the combat loop.
Grenades were made integral to the core combat loop due to their AoE damage not requiring particularly great aim.
The grenades, specifically plasma grenades, were just as much tuned to be thrown at the player to flush them out of cover and keep moving as they were for the player themselves to use. Also, grenades serve the same purpose in Halo as they do in every other game. There were also Flood and Energy Sword elites to push you out of cover. Also, that sentimental closing paragraph. In my notes, I simply wrote, "Come off it, mate, patronizing." Basically just one big "sucks to be you, loser." But I guess there's one final point that's necessary. How did Halo save first-person shooters? Well, the truth is, the industry was already well and truly moving away from Doom's style well before Halo came around. Since Half-Life, Everybody wanted to make scripted, linear, cinematic action. That was more of an inspiration for Call of Duty than anything else. Doom fell in relevance alongside id as they hemorrhaged employees due to their toxic culture, and former employees went on to produce subpar products like Daikatana, or moving on to completely different genres outside of FPS. The fantasy of old classic FPS died, not killed by Halo, but by its own makers. In a time when scripted linear gameplay was the new hotness, Halo came along with wide open levels and player choice. It also made sure that outside of cutscenes, it was all action, and that there was nothing you do in a cutscene that would be better done in gameplay. The cutscenes were unintrusive. Halo was inventive. It's still unmatched in terms of the interplay with these dynamic elements. Not to mention, it created online gaming as we know it. Proximity chat, party chat, lobbies, in-game friends lists. It also brought in matchmaking, which is contentious for social modes, but undeniably a massive boost for ranked and competitive modes. To this very day, it's Halo that truly saw the rise of competitive gaming. Halo stood up as a pillar of design over the years. A decade later, in an era of brown, modern military FPS, Halo stood for non-linear mission design and unintrusive cutscenes. It also resisted features such as kill cams, hit markers, and ADS. Halo did have set pieces, but they were the opposite of scripted. There was no single way to approach an encounter like the Scarab. Truth is, we're lucky to have had Halo. Its popularity was not detrimental to first-person shooters, and it was not responsible for creating nor popularizing cover-based shooters. Halo was simply in the right place at the wrong time. But do you want to be lucky? It's quite simple. If you do, subscribe to Shredded Nerd. There is an exponential relationship between the number of Shredded Nerd subscribers and the luck of the average subscriber. So let's get those numbers up. Who knows, you could find $1 on the floor, you could win the lottery, or even better, you could end up with a brand new Shredded Nerd video in your subscription feed. Let me know your thoughts or response to this video. Thank you all so much for watching this long ass video, and goodbye. But updating would be counter to the but updating it would be counter to the but updating it would be counter to but updating it would be counter to the design of the game.